Hi folks, and welcome back to the WTF. So today we are still tinkering around with the old Land Rover. Well, not that old. And I'm getting to the stage now where you may remember that we took the roof rack off, and I am about to put that back on after replacing all the bolts with stainless steel. But I've got to reinstall my aerial for my transceiver, which is a 2-meter ham radio transceiver, and that happens to be my Ellicraft KX3, which is my HF QRP transceiver. And I thought I would take this opportunity to sort of go over a few things and principles if you're contemplating installing either a small 2-meter rig of ham radio or a CB, given that CB radios are very popular in 4x4s and not uncommonly in Land Rover vehicles, especially when you're going off-roading and things like that. So if this video is probably more aimed at the sort of off-road fraternity, people who do not have an amateur radio background, who might be keen on some information about how to install a CB radio or something similar for off-roading. So I'm going to go over some of the principles and the various aspects of that. So there is essentially 3 things you have to bear in mind when you're about to install a small radio rig, a transmitting rig, be it CB or amateur radio, into a vehicle. And you have to consider, first of all, the aerial, the aerial mount. How is it going to actually fix onto the car? How are you going to connect your aerial to your transceiver? So, what type of coaxial cable do you need? And the other thing that's very important is the power supply. So how are you going to power your rig? So I think what we'll do is we'll start off with the power supply first. So what you have to bear in mind is when you install a power supply, you have to appreciate the current requirement of your rig, of your particular rig. Now with CB radios and small rigs, you're probably looking at perhaps maximum about 10 amps, because the output power is usually about 5 watts. So if you around about 10 to 20 amps is, well, probably much less than 20 amps, but 5 to 10 amps, something like that, for a small CB radio, to be on the safe side. If you're looking at a 100 watt amateur radio transmitter, now those run off a 12 volt power supply, which is usually rated about 30 amps. So whatever cabling you're using for, say, a 100 watt transmitter, you need to take that into consideration, make sure you've got some pretty chunky wires. So in this situation, the 2-meter rig I've got down there, which puts out about maximum about I think it's about 20 watts actually. You can see that the cabling here is quite chunky, and that is actually connected directly to the battery by going underneath this carpet here and then into the battery compartment through a hole. The other thing I've done here, which you can sometimes do as well, is use what's called a rig runner, which you can see there. And these are basically almost like 12 volt distribution points, which are based on the Anderson power pole connectors. So what I've got here, if I can just find it, so that lead there connects into the rig runner, and therefore you've got your 12 volts, and you've got various fuses there for different power outlets. So what I've done with this is I've used this for for powering camping equipment, and also for powering different radios. So it's quite a handy little device, and all it does is screw on there, and you've got your sort of standard automotive type fuses. And this this lead here effectively goes straight to the battery, just across the battery. So, and obviously, you know, if you've got a rig or a CB radio or anything like that, just make sure you've got an inline fuse between the, you know, it's running in the positive rail of your radio, because what you don't want is there's electrical fault. You don't want the whole thing to go up and smoke and cause more damage. So always don't take shortcuts. Always use plenty of fuses. So I've got fuses not only in this, but I would also have a fuse in the main positive rail of going up to my little 2-meter rig. Okay, so I think that more or less covers the power supply issues. So this aerial mount was the original one that was on the roof rack, and it's not too bad actually. It has corroded a bit. In fact, that washer is corroded, so I think if I was putting this on again, I would probably replace that with a stainless steel washer. But as you can see, this has a connector, which is an SO259, which is a standard UHF, or that's a connector, but it's often used at HF. It's quite a very common connector for RF. And if you can see a couple of these 2-meter aerials, you can see that it's got these have screw-on PL259 connection, so the thing just simply screws onto the aerial mount. Now there are different sorts of aerial mounts. If you're going for a permanent installation, like on a roof rack of a 4x4 or something like that, then I would probably recommend something a bit more substantial than this. I did use it for a while, but it did work. Didn't have any major problems, but it did tend to, I think the mounting was a little bit inferior, I would say, and you do get better quality ones than this. If you look on places like Martin Lynch and Nevada Radio, those sorts of things, they've got better quality aerial mounts, especially if you're using a taller aerial such as this 2-meter dual band aerial, which, you know, obviously is going to wiggle around quite a bit, especially if you're sort of driving. So the other aerial that we have here is a standard sort of CB aerial, and you'll notice here that just lay it flat there, the connector there is slightly different to a PL259 type. So you bear that in mind when you're deciding what sort of aerial mount to get. Now, the other thing that you can do as well is sometimes you can use these magnetic plates, magnetic mounts. I think they obviously vary in quality, but you know, I think for a permanent installation, I don't think they're really good. I think you probably need to use something else if you're planning to sort of keep the aerial up all the time. But they're not too bad if you're sort of planning to sort of remove the aerial, you know, when you finish using it. And they're not really that good if you're sort of driving around, because I have to admit, if I was on the motorway with a magnetic mount aerial, I feel a bit I think I'd feel a bit insecure with it. I'd be worried it was about to fall off. Okay, so that's more or less covers, you know, mounting the aerial. The next thing what we have to think about is how to get the aerial connected to the rig with the various coaxial cable. Now, the commonest type of cable for coax is for things like CB and also for amateur radio to a degree is RG58. Now, that's 50 ohm coax. So if you don't know much about coaxial cables and impedances, and you're putting in, say, a CB radio, you have to make sure it's 50 ohm, because the output of the radio is going to be 50 ohm impedance, so that you need to get 50 ohm coax. Don't go and buy sort of bog standard satellite coax, which is 75 ohm, or TV coax or something like that, because it won't work, and your radio will will not put out a very, very effective signal. So you have to make sure you use the right type of coax, so always check that. So yeah, this is going back to the RG58. This is pretty standard stuff. It's not that terribly expensive, and The only thing is, I would say that if you're planning on leaving the aerial out permanently, in other words doing a sort of permanent installation like using, for instance, a roof rack or on the outside of the vehicle, I'm not so sure that RG58 is the best to use. This is the stuff I had up originally, which was on the roof rack, and it's gone quite stiff, you know, from being outside all the time. And I've actually decided to use something a little bit more slightly different and probably a bit more pricier. So for this, for when I get the aerial back up and start reading the coax, I'm going to be using this RG400, and this has a FEP jacket, fluorinated ethylene propylene, which has similar properties to PTFE, so the sunlight won't rot it, and also the weather won't destroy it. So hence the reason why I'm going for this slightly better quality coax, but it is significantly more expensive. So in terms of routing the coax, we'll just go back to the vehicle and we can show you what I've done with mine. So if we look at the roof there, you can see I've made a hole and it's got a grommet, and that's basically the coax comes off the roof rack and through that grommet and then into the vehicle in the corner there. Hope you can see it. And at the moment I've got the coax here. I'm planning to I literally cut off the ends when I took the roof rack off, and I'm going to put some if I can get it into focus. Where is it? There we go. I'm going to put some female SO259s on the end of those, and then we can connect up the coax as it comes through the vehicle. One of the things you want to do as well is, if you're bringing coaxial cables through the vehicle, through the roof or whatever, like through a grommet, just make sure you put silicone sealer around that grommet to make sure that you don't get water coming in, because that I can guarantee you will, even if the cable looks like it's filling the hole. And then what I've done here is I've run the cable, plus there's also some other cables there for the lights and etc. And they run along the side here under the carpets and then towards the front. And this RG58 that I've used here is actually been okay, because it's been indoors or been inside the vehicle. So I'll probably keep that rather than sort of replace the whole shebang with RG400. Just a quick note about connectors while we're on the subject of coax. So the for most people, in terms of sort of mobile operations, CB radio, the commonest type of coax connector is the PL259, which we've got a selection of here, and that goes into the SO259, which is the female version. The easiest ones to use, in my opinion, are these screw-on ones, which you can see there. And these are quite easy to use because you simply strip the outside sleeving off about an inch or thereabouts, and then expose the central conductor again a few centimeters, then poke it through, solder the end, and then screw it on, and then solder it on the end. It's quite easy to do. There's lots of videos on how to solder on PL259s. The other thing I do as well, as you can see here, is put a piece of heat shrink over the end, which helps to secure everything in place. And again, if you're not sure about how to solder on a PL259, there are lots of YouTube videos out there which explain how to do it. It's not that difficult. And the other thing as well, if you're, again, this is more aimed at the CB, is always make sure that especially when you do the power supply aspect of your rig, you've got your negative is properly grounded to the body or the chassis of the vehicle, you know, because again the ground forms part of the overall antenna system, and if the rig is not grounded or nothing else is grounded, then it's going to affect the performance of your radio. So that's more or less you know, the basic principles of installing a radio and antenna coax for a vehicle. So I hope that helps. Anyway, cheers for now, and thanks for watching.